Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, thank you so much for receiving us this evening in completion of a promise we made when we awarded these honorary doctorates in 2020. At the time, COVID had invaded all of our lives, countries, communities, families, bodies, and our conferring of these important degrees was done virtually. But I promised the royal couple that we would come back in person when days were brighter, and as the American poet said, promises are to be kept. And as we drove here to this beautiful place, and I observed your very, very beautiful forests, I thought of the same poet saying that the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but we have promises to keep. We have promises to keep internationally, nationally, and promises towards our ideals. And miles to go before we sleep, and miles to go before we sleep. So there are challenges ahead, but it is a great honor for us to be here to award and confer these important degrees. First of all, to His Royal Highness Prince Radu of Romania, for his outstanding life contributions, nationally and internationally, to vital humanitarian projects and ideals. For, from a young age, his natural elegance, nobility, and compassion. For his example to the world of an inborn, understated, and unpretentious royalty. For his dedicated commitment to democracy in his beloved Romania. For his very positive contributions to the good image of Romania, and therefore for his shining example of Serviendo Guberno, which is the motto of the Geneva School of Diplomacy. To govern or to reign is to serve. Is therefore, and here the next sentence is in Latin, hodie incommutus academicis admissum esse, is admitted today into this academic community, and is hereby conferred with and admitted to the university degree of Doctor of International Relations, Honoris Causa, in witness whereof, by the authority committed to us in law, we have hereunder placed our names as testimony. Your Royal Highness.
Your Majesty, Your Royal Highnesses, Mr. President of Geneva School of Diplomacy and International Relations, I would like to only say how lucky I think we are, Her Majesty and myself, to have been able to serve our country in the last 30 years, and how incredibly surprising was the recent past and the present, the continuing present, both in our country and in the rest of the world. So when I visited your wonderful university, two elements were extraordinarily impressive and convincing. One was your motto, governing, is serving, is something of a painfully contemporary relevance. We see in the whole world, including in the very stable and advanced democracies, a huge gap between the expectation of people, between their trust and their leaders. And somehow the world of the late 80s and beginning of the 90s are now memory. A lot of other things changed in the world, together with, obviously, an increasing democratization of the European continent. Our part of the world was late in both accessing NATO and the European Union. And this delay is visible today in all our efforts. But interestingly enough, at the same time with our fulfilling our obligations and aspirations, we witnessed a decrease of the exercise of democracy in our part of the world, which we used to call, when we were young, the ideal world. I remember that my generation dreamt to live in a country like the Federal Republic of Germany or like the United States. These two exceptional countries were, at the time of my youth, an adjective in themselves and not only the name of two nations. So we were lucky, Mr. President, we were lucky to be able to come back to our natural democratic existence in this country. We were lucky to be accepted. We were lucky to have 3 uninterrupted decades of service, unlike the previous generations of my wife's family. Both King Michael I and his father, King Carol II, were forced to pass part of their lives in exile. We were lucky to be for 30 years here every day and to try to recreate and at times reinvent royal diplomacy for this gap of 50 years of communism erased from our souls and from our minds. Any kind of souvenir or testimony about what this extraordinary tool could do for the good of the world. And here we are in 2021, at the end of the year, after 2 very complicated years for humanity, keeping our promises. And for this, I would like to thank you very much, and only to hope that your university will continue to inspire us, to give us advice, and to develop projects for the benefit of the young generation of Romania and of the Republic of Moldova. And another very personal reason of joy and gratefulness for this very important title is the fact that your headquarters are in Geneva, the place where my family-in-law chose for their exile, the place where an important part of the multilateral diplomacy happens and was actually shaped. The United Nations and the other world organizations, and the place which is commonly known for its righteousness, equilibrium, neutrality, and wisdom. Thank you.
Your Majesty, just a couple of remarks before the conferring of your degree. Your father, King Michael, and I were neighbors for almost 10 years in Versoix, Switzerland. And I did not know, frankly, whom he was. He was just that nice man who always smiled and said good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and we did that for years. My daughter referred to him as that nice man up the street. And she later went on to be married in the mairie of Versoix, which I understand was where the royal couple had their civil wedding, a building I pass every day. Tomorrow, and it's a privilege for us to be here, marks the 100th anniversary of his birth. A year that also stands out for me because it was the year my own country, Ireland, became independent after some 800 years of difficulty. When I first crossed, or several times crossed from time to time, King Michael, I didn't know who he was, but I had the impression, as one does, of a neighbor, of somebody upright, manly, somebody with integrity, somebody who doesn't know the meaning of hate. We formed these quick impressions, and later on in reading history, I understood more deeply that's exactly whom he was. Some 24 years or so after his birth, there was another important birth in the world. In the city of St. Francis, the United Nations was born. 76 years ago today. An outfit, an organization, an idea, a concept also dedicated to being upright, dedicated to integrity, to peace, freedom, human dignity, but not just manly, because women have been so wrongly excluded for so long that gender issue is of great importance. One other remark. In our university, and I've been through some 4 wars and 11 or 12 conflicts that other people would call war, because at the beginning of my career, I made the mistake of volunteering to go to a war zone. And when the Secretary General of the UN sent me there, I got lucky and arranged a ceasefire. So they kept sending me to these things, hence mistake. But I learned 1 or 2 things. And the last mission I was to go on was supposed to be in Baghdad. But a suicide bomber blew up the UN headquarters, and my friend Sergio de Mello and many of his comrades, our colleagues, were killed. So we've put even more focus on what we do in our university. And we try to bring to it the idea that in many such dangerous missions for peace, those with the humanitarian instinct often lack the professional skills. And those with the professional skills often lack the humanitarian instinct. But there is nothing as important as compassion. Compassion does not mean quite the same thing as empathy. It does not mean giving in to bullies from wherever they come. It means standing up for what one believes in, but at least comprehending better where the other person comes from. We don't denigrate oppositions, and we don't shoot prisoners. In our university, we have often the sons and daughters of world leaders, prime ministers, presidents, royal couples, etc. And this famous royal couple of Romania stands out as one of the most inspiring one has ever encountered. Because our students are taught that royalty is something that requires serving, it means modesty, and it means understanding that one is there to serve others. So it's a privilege for me to confer this degree on Her Majesty. And our citation is again as follows. Hodie incognitas academicis admissum esse. Into this academic community today is admitted Her Majesty Margareta of Romania, for her outstanding life contributions, nationally and internationally, to vital humanitarian projects and ideals, for her example to the world of the true meanings of the words royal and noble, understated, modest, elegant, humble, and above all, compassionate. For her renowned dedicated work with the International Red Cross and similar organizations. For her commitment to democracy and fairness in her beloved Romania. And therefore, for her shining worldwide example of Serviendo Guberno, the motto of our Geneva School of Diplomacy, to reign is to serve, is hereby conferred with and admitted to the university degree of Doctor of International Relations, Honoris Causa, in witness whereof, by the authority committed to us in law, we have hereunder placed our name as testimony. Your Majesty.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is with pleasure and pride that I welcome Dr. Colm Murphy, President and founder of Geneva School of Diplomacy and International Relations, and Mr. Rakesh Krishnan to the State Hall of Pellesh Castle. I know it may be fashionable to say that in this age of instant communication, when ministers and heads of government talk to each other on the phone or by Zoom almost daily and hold frequent summits, royal diplomacy, or any kind of diplomacy for that matter, may no longer be necessary. But this is certainly a myth, for although the functions and duties of diplomacy have clearly changed and will continue to evolve, there is no substitute for the knowledge that's required in dealing with a country and for the personal links and relations that need to be established between nations, all of which royal diplomacy create and cultivate permanently. My father, King Michael, as well as all my predecessors, presided over many public events in precisely this room, and we continue this tradition today, but in very different circumstances. For Romania's condition at the time of my father were grim. We were either faced with the dominance of Nazism and fascism or the dominance of Stalin's Soviet Union. The Romania of 2021 is in an incomparably better position. We are a member of the European Union and of the North Atlantic Alliance, a network of organizations that underpin our stability today and ensure our security and prosperity into the future. Romanians understand and value the enormous contributions that both these organizations make to our country. We all know that our membership in these two organizations provides us with huge advantages, but also means huge obligations that we respect. In NATO, Romania is already an exporter, not just a consumer of security. And in the European Union, our political leadership will do everything possible to uphold our unity of purpose. Whatever disagreements we may have, I know that our country will never threaten the unity of the European Union. In addition to our ongoing activities in Romanian communities and our charitable commitments, my family and I contribute continuously, alongside our state institutions, to the promotion of Romania's interests and image globally. I am fully aware that this is not an easy task, that years of a good reputation can be erased in one ugly incident, and that no propaganda effort can make bad things look good. I also know that stereotyped misperceptions constructed over many decades are not easily dismantled. Nevertheless, I believe that what Romania has achieved since the fall of communism, what she has achieved in 155 years of modern statehood, and the full century since our great union, needs to be explained and presented better to the world. Not only because we should be justifiably proud of what has been accomplished, but mainly because a sharper, clearer, and more modern image of our country is also of direct benefit to our own citizens, many of whom work and live outside our borders. During our travels, missions, speeches, and many other activities, we wish to emphasize the profoundly European roots of our country and society, and our enduring contribution to our continent. This is a multidisciplinary, multi-religious, and multi-ethnic contribution, one which enriches the continent and one which is enriched by it, one which is not frozen in the past, but in many respects enjoys a renaissance today, as millions of our citizens take up residence in other countries, many, I hope, for only a short period of time. I do not believe that our family's effort is purely nationalist enterprise. For what we plan to do will, I hope, also highlight just how interconnected the so-called Western Europe is with the so-called East. We are together now because we were always together. It was only the cruel twists of history that temporarily set us apart. Nor does this effort need to be exclusively European. Just as our political leadership strives to do constantly, we must also emphasize the essential role of the two great North American nations in our transatlantic alliance, as well as why we should stay united. Dr. Murphy, as the royal family will continue to undertake duties in the interest of our nation, we hope to be able to rely on your shrewd advice and support, and to develop new projects with the Geneva School of Diplomacy and International Relations. Tomorrow, we celebrate 100 years since the birth of King Michael. Throughout my life, the shining beacon which guided me in everything I did was my father. Whenever I wondered which direction to take, I only had to look at that beacon and get the right answer. Thank you for the prestigious honorary doctorate bestowed onto me by your university. And I renew my pledge to the Romanians that King Michael's beacon, that beacon of an honorable and just Romania, will never be dimmed.